He's absent today.
All right, it is 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call the Planning Committee meeting to order. We have 4 things on the agenda tonight, and the first thing is a presentation by Prospectus. Before we begin, though, could every guest make sure that they've signed in tonight? There's a sign-in sheet by the door back there. So we have a couple of people from Prospectus. Maybe if you could come up to the microphone and introduce yourselves. And then, do you have a presentation to present over here on the overhead?
Yes, yep. Yep.
It's on, yeah, it should be on.
So I'm Polly Bloom.
Hi, Polly.
I'm a historic preservationist.
And I'm Lauren Burge, principal and architect in the Historic Preservation Studio at Prospectus.
Well, thank you for coming tonight, and go ahead and proceed with your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions for you,
Okay,
too.
good. Well, thank you. We appreciate the time that the Planning Commission and council members are taking tonight. Our objective tonight is just really to give an overview of the work that we're going to be doing for the Design Review Commission on the design guidelines and some other activities that we've been asked to do. So just to begin, our project is working directly with the Design Review Commission, and these guidelines have been funded in part with money from the Ohio History Connection. And our team is Lauren, myself, and we also have a couple of members back at our office in Cleveland, Alice Sloan and Olivia Zepp. The Design Review Committee for Ravenna had stated what their city's mission statement is for their historic landmarks and neighborhoods. And like many Design Review commissions, their objective is really to help educate the public, present assistance, and help protect the historic properties in their community. This timeline shows a little bit of some of the important steps that have happened in the city of Ravenna with regards to historic districts. One of the first ones being that in 1986, the community created these historic guidelines. There was an ordinance passed. And then in 2013, CLG status was granted. CLG is certified local government. And what that does is that is a designation by the National Park Service for a community to be able to individually manage their historic properties. And most importantly, they can designate historic properties. This then kind of allows easier access to federal and state funds without having to go directly all through the state channel to identify historic properties. So it's a big step. It makes it convenient for your community, and it's something to be proud of. In May 2004, and this came out of the ordinance, the Design Review Commission was established. And we have started this project. We had a meeting in early November with the Design Review Commission to talk about some of the next steps. I came in late November and took some photographs. I was real lucky. It wasn't a snowy day. It was a beautiful sunny day. And it really was an enjoyable day. I always like it when you have a chance to get on the sidewalks and walk in front of every building. So I really enjoyed that day, and as I told Lauren, I think Ravenna is probably one of the longest and most historic main streets that we have worked on in terms of the length and how many properties you have. So it's really a beautiful community and historic district. And then at the end of this, you'll see we're anticipating that the project should be clearly done before the end of this year. So we were identified to do these three things by the Design Review Committee. The three things were they want to review and update the existing preservation ordinance. They want to create design guidelines that would also refer back to the 2017 draft that they provided to us. And they also would like us to review and comment on the sign code in Chapter 1458. And this is just a quick review of 1434, the local preservation ordinance. These are pretty standard statements of purpose that we see with many ordinances. You know, the intents to safeguard the heritage of communities like Ravenna that, you know, date back to the early 1800s or even before. Maintaining that character and not letting it be removed or adjusted to the point that you no longer can see the story of the community. It also helps through protecting those historic buildings to incite people to reinvest in the community and revitalize the community, which, you know, these last three things, it fosters civic beauty, it stabilizes property values, and it strengthens the local economy. And that's just not us saying that. There have been noted national economists who have done research on historic communities and, you know, have the data that show that a well-done historic community does increase the economic vitality of the area. So we're just going to briefly give an overview of what design guidelines are about right now. First of all, the most important thing is the design guidelines are a way for the Design Review Commission, the Planning Commission, Council, to help communicate and celebrate Ravenna's history. Ravenna is a wonderful community that, you know, dates back to before 1800, being settled early in 1799 and already starting to be platted in the early 1800s and establishing courthouses. You're one of the communities that benefited from the canal system. So by 1840, you're already starting to see growth and prosperity in the area. And then as we move on, we also see that there were additions to the courthouse by the late 1880s. The flagpole, your noted flagpole, was constructed in around the 1890s. And then what followed was also the establishment of the railroads in the 1860s and 1870s here in Ohio. We were actually one of the primary spots in the nation to have railroads come through, and we were servicing the nation. And we prospered from it. Ohio was one of the top 6 industrial states at the turn of the century in the 1900s. And so you'll find that communities of all sizes in Ohio established their industry, and Ravenna likewise did. And, you know, you started to get the hospitals and the schools, and, you know, some of the noted industries for Ravenna, of course, Mr. Riddle establishing the Hearst Company, and then the Quaker Oats Company, and then the Arsenal was a very dramatic occurrence to have in your community that then also, you know, motivated other businesses from there. And then we just wanted to also note that in the 1990s, there was already some work being done in your downtown with a $3 million facelift, which is quite evident. As I said, the railroads really helped Ravenna. That started in 1851. The first railroad to come through was the Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and in total you had 4 railroads that went through the city. And you also benefited from the passenger trains that were active up until about the time that automobiles became prevalent. That's when unfortunately, the interurban train started to decline. But you did, in the early 1900s, you had over 50 passenger trains coming through Ravenna at that time. You also, as I mentioned, you had Riddle, Coach, and Hearst. The Canalway connections also brought industry. Excuse me. You had Glass Works and then the Quaker Oats Company. And then the Arsenal. Some of the other industries that flourished were the Enduro Rubber, Duracoat, and the aircraft, which, that's just probably the tip of the iceberg, especially with the Arsenal and the military activities in Ravenna. That spurred a lot of military-type businesses. And then what you see when you have industry and the number of employees coming is the growth in the commercial area, providing restaurants, hotels, commercial retail facilities. And then you also see the growth in the neighborhoods, with the neighborhoods showing both worker housing and manager housing, and starting to see the wealth of the industrial strength that Ravenna had. And so the guidelines purpose is really because this carries out from being a certified local government and being certified by the National Park Service. This is another way that at the national level, the Secretary of the Interior guidelines for rehabilitation is all about how we want to handle and treat historic properties in the United States. And it's through the National Park Service, which is part of the Secretary of the Interior. These provide specifications, tries to lay out parameters that can easily be read by a layperson. You should not have to be a professional in architectural or the construction industry to understand what you can or cannot do. And that's what the primary objective is. And to provide some easy to understand examples through illustrations and photographs. And then basically for the Planning Commission to help someone understand what they have to do to get a certificate of appropriateness and the steps that they need to take, using flow charts, easy to read language, and that's the purpose of the guidelines. This schedule, it's showing up a little small here, but as I stated, we kicked off in November. I did a field assessment and a photography day in late November, and today we are having basically our first workshop where we wanted to introduce this to other members outside of the Design Review Committee and any public attendees. And then from here, we are going to work with the Design Review Committee to identify a time and date for like a virtual Zoom public meeting that will actually review many of these slides to explain in a larger setting to a larger group of public individuals what the design guidelines would be. So many of these slides will be used. And then after that, we'll start taking the steps to create the document, starting with a draft outline, getting that approved, showing the draft outline to the team, and starting to create the draft document. And at a point in time, we'll also share that draft document with the public after it's been reviewed by the State Historical Office, which takes anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. You'll get it to a state, and because this is being funded by the State Historical Office, it will have to have a review at that first draft. And then when it comes back, we'll also organize another meeting where the public can actually see that draft document. It gives a final chance to make any comments, changes that are needed, or hear any ideas from the public, and then it should be to the point where we're wrapping it up. And at that point, it will come to council for review and approval, and then it will go back to SHPO, that's the State Historic Office, for one last look, and then it should be put into production. At that point, You can create electronic copies. You can put things on the website. Usually our design review commissions start to do training. They'll have public meetings and help introduce this and illustrate how it can be used by people in the public. Most often, some of the people who want to come first are the business owners in that district. So as you can see here, we're anticipating to be done by late summer, early fall. And then this is just an illustration of the specific area that we're highlighting in the design guidelines. Between Sycamore and Linden Streets on either side of East and West Main are the properties that are in the National Register of Historic Places district for Ravenna. And so this outlines where those are located. And then finally, the most important thing I think to recognize with the design guidelines is these are best practices. They're non-binding. It's usually a companion to an ordinance, which is what you will be doing. They're tailored specifically to a community. Each one that we write is different. Some communities, don't necessarily have all the same types of buildings or types of materials or types of challenges. So we really try to tailor it to what is the fabric of that community. And it's a way for the Historic Review Commission, the Design Review Commission, to help interpret this ordinance and illustrate it, as we said, through images and pictures. And then the nice thing about this is when they're non-binding, they're easier to update. They don't have to go through readings for ordinances and votes like you would with an ordinance. So it does make it simpler for the Design Review Commission to manage these going into the future.
I'm going to move the mic down a little bit for me. Can you hear me okay? So one of the things we want to talk about within these guidelines are some of the benefits of having an ordinance and guidelines, so people understand the purpose and how this affects the community in terms of pride of community and economic benefit. So some of the key ones that are commonly talked about with having a historic preservation district, historic preservation ordinance, historic district guidelines are that communities that value historic preservation tend to have higher property values. It's pretty common. And they tend to retain those market values through economic fluctuations, where some property values go up and down and up and down. Within a controlled district, they tend to stay pretty stable, or at least not so extreme. They do tend to have increased business traffic. People like to shop, eat, work, play in a place that they find aesthetically pleasing, handsome, looks like everyone is really kind of working together to create some pride in the community. And people do love history. It is the #1 tourism attraction after the beach. If you go to TripAdvisor today and Google things to do in Ohio, the top, I think, 3 are historic sites to visit or historic communities to go to. One is a walking tour of downtown Cleveland. One is a walking tour of Cincinnati Caves. So people do love history. They're especially interested in history that relates to themselves. So people are interested in their own community, and they're willing to spend time and money pursuing it. And then there are, once you have what you currently have is an ordinance, once you have kind of a good historic preservation program, there are a lot of economic incentives that you can tap into. So people in downtown Ravenna, property owners already qualify to pursue historic tax credits, sometimes historic designation, historic programs, have other benefits, funds from private organizations as well as public. And those are already taking place here in Ravenna. So this is, I'm just going to quickly review what a typical table of contents for the guidelines would look like. This is something that we can tailor specifically to Ravenna based on feedback from our public meetings. Typically, there's an introduction, which talks about the purpose of even having guidelines. As Polly said, it's always based on national standards. And that kind of takes away that arbitrariness. If everybody across the country kind of follows similar program and standards, it generally takes away that arbitrariness. It talks about the applicability, who has to follow these guidelines, the process for applying for a certificate of appropriateness, and a boundary map that shows kind of where the boundaries of the application of the guidelines and ordinance are. It'll have a history of Ravenna, as Polly said. It's something that we want people to be excited about. There's a rich history here, and we definitely want to celebrate it, make it easy to access for everybody, especially with some illustrations. Illustrations of styles and types. So these will be, and we're going to show you a couple examples. We're going to look at styles and types of buildings, specifically using Ravenna examples. What people need to understand is what's appropriate for one type of style building is not always appropriate for another, and it's really hard to describe that in an ordinance, which has legal language, but it's much easier to understand when you look at it in an illustrated guideline. Let's see, we talked a little bit about preservation and design philosophy. Everything is based on the national standards, so it's not my opinion. It's not Polly's opinion. It's what the national standards are, and it is somewhat tempered by input we get from the community. Guidelines for it'll have guidelines for changes to historic structures by feature, so it'll talk about windows, doors, masonry work, awnings, signage, those kinds of things. It'll talk a little bit about guidelines for new construction within a historic district. So if there's an opportunity for new development within the historic district, what does that look like in terms of scale? How does it impact a historic district, and how to prioritize that? It'll talk about signage and show some examples. We'll talk a little bit about accommodating code compliance in historic buildings. There are very specific components of the building code that are related to existing and historic buildings. So we want to point out that those exist and make sure people understand that or have access to an explanation in plain language. Application of the Americans with Disabilities Act to historic properties. And then I'll have a whole section on general maintenance, repairs, and tips, how to take care of your building. It's surprising how just a little bit of information is really helpful, some do's and don'ts. We'll talk about demolition and moving, because those are our last resorts, and we want to talk about them as these are our last resorts. How can we avoid it? How can we avoid demolition by neglect? What can we do to protect our buildings to keep them from getting into a situation where demolition is kind of the final resort? And then the last thing will be appendices. These are pretty lengthy. There's usually a bibliography of all our sources of information, some definitions so that people can look up if they see the word finial and they want to find out what a finial is. It should be in there. And it'll also have some further reading resources, places beyond these guidelines where you can go for more information, how to properly repoint brickwork, how to find all of this information. So it'll have quite a bit there. So I want to talk a little bit about types of buildings. This is my favorite part of the whole guidelines. And especially here, I think you have just an incredibly rich stock of styles and types of buildings in Ravenna, both commercial buildings as well as residential buildings. So the historic district has many different types of styles. Okay. This one, Etna House, we would definitely, kind of pull this into the Italianate, which was very popular in the 1840s, 1860s, and then it kind of trickled off towards the end. But it's pretty common to see round-headed arches, round-headed windows, very common part of the style. It's common to see cornices, it's common to see, and even though there are some alterations to some of these buildings, they're all typical of that type and style. And this is probably one of the most common types of downtown buildings you'll see in Ohio. Next one. This one I just think is so special. This whole block is amazing. The kind of centerpiece of it is an 1846 building by the date stone, and it is Gothic Revival, and there are not many of this scale, of this style in Ohio. They were usually lost before the 1920s, so having something like this in your downtown is phenomenal. It's such a special and dynamic style. All of those finials at the top are definitely keys to the style. There's a lot of ornamental work. There are arched windows. It's just really an exuberant building. Romanesque Revival, this is kind of towards the end of the 19th century. We see this, can be anywhere from 1850s, but very popular towards 1890s, especially with under the influence of architect H.H. Richardson. You see a lot of grouped arched openings, some really heavy stone and brick details. Let's go to the next one. We call this one Eastlake style. They're very similar to the way the Italianate form is. We're calling this one Eastlake. It does definitely have influences. Those little pediments on the top are kind of something that we tend to look towards Eastlake. You'll find that a lot of buildings are a mix of styles.
Eastlake of what?
Eastlake was based on the design influence of Charles Eastlake. He published a book called Hints on Household Taste in about, I want to say, 1874. And he really loved kind of these Moorish, heavy, ornamented. You see a lot of Eastlake style furniture. You see a lot of incised carvings, real fine, light carving. So.
Where was he from?
Good question. I think England. I'm Eastlake?
Me either.
East of Lake? This will all be in the guidelines. So the idea is that we would point out what makes this style this style. We typically draw over these elevations to show, what parts are missing. So you can see sort of an idealized version of the buildings that we pick as our subject matter for each style. So let's go on. You have some great early 20th century neoclassical buildings, like Grota Block 9, which is definitely very classical looking, big cornice, classical detailing. You see some Georgian Revival buildings, and some new formalism, some modernist buildings. We are getting to the point where, for the National Register of Historic Places, a building to be considered for designation has to be 50 years or older. So now we're seeing modernist buildings getting listed on the National Register, and really, essentially, anything built before 1974 is considered eligible. So that is kind of the first key. So we are definitely seeing a lot of modernist buildings getting addressed and celebrated. At the east end of Main Street, we have a lot of wonderful residential buildings, so a couple styles that you find here, like this Dutch colonial, and then this phenomenal example of prairie style. And then I want to show you a little bit, give you kind of a sneak peek into the way we would get some input in the next meeting. So these are what we call our research exercises. So what we typically do, go ahead to the next slide, is put forth what were some of the goals of the design guidelines that came from the original request for proposals and the original inquiry. So we put some of the things out there and ask people to rank them in terms of what's most important to them. And that helps us get a feel for what the community wants. They can add to their comments, but this helps us get a good sense of that. And then what they think are the most pressing challenges in the community. And we give them a list and ask them to rank them. And then the last question we ask, and you can start thinking about this, is where do you like to go and spend your time and money? So we don't try and give you much more than that to go on, but we'll just take a list, so you can start formulating your list, and we'll ask you that next time we meet. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Before we get to the guests, are there questions? By the way, I wanted to mention that I appreciate your new timeline. I was sent a timeline that seemed to indicate that your work would be done by April. So now we're talking about September, which is a much more accommodating timeline. I guess I don't really have a question, or maybe you'd like to comment on what we're looking for, or what you described, but maybe more boiled down is, on the one hand, the logistics, helping with the guidelines and the code, all those things that were on that first slide, so that the Design Review Commission in particular, and to some degree City Council, have a better understanding of what, let's say, the rules are, and what is expected of property owners within the historic district or on a historic property in the city. So that's sort of like the basis for why we went down this road to engage with a consultant, because there were some concerns, there were some questions, and there were some issues that came up in pursuing that. To what extent the Design Review Commission was allowed to prevent somebody from doing something and so forth. But to me, and by the way, that also includes like the intersection between what is historic preservation, what are the guidelines to keep our city in that state, and the ability for owners to conduct economic development, to expand their businesses and so forth. And I see it, and I think you see it the same way, as not really a conflict, but sort of like, if we truly understand and do historic preservation right, it enhances, doesn't compete with economic development. But there will be some questions as you go through this process from people suggesting that historic preservation to some extent interferes with the ability to do economic development. So I don't really have a question, just sort of like putting that out there if you haven't already experienced that. But the other thing that intrigues me, and I think you kind of hit on it in the sense that you've explored the history of the city, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, because I thought we were talking about architecture and things like that, but you're actually talking about history, and of course, they go hand in hand, right? So, but I like to think strategically. So it's not just about the past, but it's about the future. And I hope that the outcome of your work is that it's not just guidelines for that practical component I was talking about, but sort of like a blueprint for the future for Ravenna. What's going to make, and, this a great city continuing into the future in terms of historic preservation. So if you want to comment on any of that, that's fine. Otherwise, it's just my musings about your presentations and why we're going down this road through the city.
I think those are all great comments, and Polly is taking notes. But yes, those are why we were brought in, to kind of help you with these issues. Every community goes through these struggles because it is a balance in terms of, making sure that we are respecting people's property rights versus how does this benefit the whole community, and make sure that, what we're doing is cohesive, makes sense. And when you start looking at other communities, you go, oh, this works here. And, this is not going to be done in a vacuum, too. We're using the national guidelines. Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties is what your ordinance is based on. The ordinances are always written in legal language with no pictures. That's how that's how legal documents work. So guidelines are meant to complement them so that it gives the community pictures, examples, things to look at maybe in a new light. Oh, this is what this type of building is supposed to look like. And that's why, the commission understands these things, but the general public doesn't. And it's really hard to glean that from something written in legal language. So it's both a communication tool, and it's also, intended to have helps for people, to help them maintain their property, help them understand their property, get them excited about their properties.
Okay. Do we have questions from members of City Council?
Yes, do you have,
Paul?
I'd like to see some of the graphs that you had, on paper, because they were actually too small to read. And the other question I have is, you mentioned a public meeting down the road. Will you be physically here for that?
Yes, I believe so. Are we doing that as a Zoom meeting?
Yeah, we were going to encourage a Zoom meeting, but we can also have people here. So we can do it both ways. But we found that for most communities, that works best because a lot of people don't want to have to come down to a meeting site, but oftentimes they'll be more apt to either phone in over their lunch hour. We've had really good luck with that with other communities, or a convenient time after dinner. 1 hour, it's done, and they don't have to leave their living room or their office.
The reason I'm mentioning that, sometimes with Zoom meetings, I've seen problems sometimes, so there's not always a guarantee of a perfect connection. And you're coming here, there's no problems with those things. I just wanted to find out about that, but I believe this is much better.
Let us talk to the committee and figure something out.
At
We can make that happen.
least one of the public meetings, I do feel, should be in public, where it gives the business owners and the property owners and our residents a chance to come in and maybe see some of the things that you have on display and to have their input that way. And not all of them are technically able to do the Zooms.
Sure,
So.
sure. I believe Polly just sent the copy of the presentation tonight to Julianne, so if you need a copy of any of the graphs or charts or timelines, she's got it.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just
Other
wanted
questions?
to,
Sure, go ahead.
you guys talked about it being non-binding, the guidelines being non-binding. And I'm assuming, which is a terrible thing to do, but I'm assuming that, because they're non-binding, that we should possibly explore in the future, exploring these more often and reviewing the guidelines more often so that we can future plan, so that we can keep them up to date instead of waiting, because when's the last time we looked at the design review guidelines?
Well, so the way our code is written right now, we don't.
Yeah, that's,
The
so
Design Review Commission creates the guidelines.
I'm just wondering though, if regardless of who creates them or who's looking at them.
It's been a while.
to
And
really
it's
build-
been a question, too, because
Yeah.
I think 2014 was the date on, did you get a
Yeah.
copy of the latest guidelines? And I'm not sure if they were ever really officially approved, because the copy I saw still had like comments and edits in them, and that may be what you got. So it's a bit of a, well, for lack of a better word, a bit of a mess.
I just feel like, having, saying it's reviewed, I mean, our charter is reviewed every 5 years. Not that it has to be that, not that it has to be something like that, but to have something where we're like, okay, let's take a look at this, so we're not waiting 20 years and half that stuff doesn't exist
Yeah,
anymore.
well, yeah, again, the whole not the whole purpose, but the kind of the reasoning behind going down this road and hiring a consultant was to tighten things up. And, yeah, I don't know how that'll come about. Maybe it'll be guidelines proposed by the commission and approved by council. I mean, there might be, and we'll have the final say on how we want to structure that. But I'm not, so the idea of non-binding, I'm not so sure that's what you're saying. I mean, there's going to be times, well, the way it works right now is an applicant in the historic district trying to make a change to their facade, something that qualifies for review by the Design Review Commission, has to get a permit to do that work, a certificate, and it has to be approved by the Design Review Commission. So in a sense, you could say the process right now is binding. So maybe you could explain, though, what you
Sure.
mean by the term non-binding as
Sure.
you presented it tonight.
So the ordinance is a binding document, and the decisions of the commission are binding. So the idea of the guidelines is to illustrate the ordinance and provide the commission with some general outside of ordinance guidance based on the Secretary of Interior standards, because even the Secretary of Interior standards, which is the federal standard, has reams of examples. I mean, there's a ton on the Park Service website on those. So the guidelines are intended to be something that helps the commission interpret the ordinance, and then it's also has things that are illustrations, which would never be in an ordinance. Very rarely do you have illustrations in any kind of code. The only time you would have something like that would be to demonstrate dimensions, like something very finite and codifiable. So it says, your setback has to be 5 feet. It's got a diagram that says, 5 feet this way, this way. They're very black and white, prescriptive, they're very prescriptive. Whereas the guidelines are a little broader in terms of thinking. They are not technically the enforceable part, but the decision of the commission is the enforceable part, if that helps. And then what the guidelines also do is they help the general public understand how the commission interprets the ordinance, and based on best practices, national standards, not their own. This is my pet peeve this week. I don't like fences over 3 feet high. They're based on national standards and why. And so it gives more illustrations, more pictures, easier to understand. It'll also have some diagrams within it. So where the ordinance says, submit your drawings and photos and all of those things, and we'll have like a little flow chart to illustrate that. So it's not just in written language in the ordinance, it's actually in a flow chart as well in the guidelines. So it helps people understand the process, how they can appeal things, what that process is. So it's non-binding in the sense that it is not a regulation. What is binding is the commission's decisions.
Look at it this way. I mean, if it was binding, we wouldn't need the Design Review Commission. It would just be black and white, and people would have to conform.
I
So
just
there's
was-
just like some room for interpretation, let's say.
And I think, as time goes on, in 10 years, the interpretation of what they're saying now
Yeah.
is going to look a little bit different.
It
So just,
could.
looking forward for future planning,
Yeah.
maybe some of the building or architecture that we're referencing in here won't be here anymore. So maybe something might have to be tweaked. I mean.
Or
I
something new
think-
will be
Or
built.
something new. Because now we're going to be building in some of those, buildings that were
Modern
within.
styles,
with
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that having an open mind and open to a little bit of adjustment with it is nice too, instead of waiting 20 years
Yeah.
to make those changes. So to have that commission take a look at it as the time goes on and make sure that it really meets
Yeah.
what we need as a city.
Yeah, I agree that, I think your overall premise is, we don't want to do what we're doing today, 50.
Again,
Yeah,
yeah.
because it's been since the 80s that this kind of discussion has really taken place with any detail. Those are good comments, thank you. Other?
The only other
Ms. Wood?
thing that I had questions on was, how do you make sure that the guidelines promote economic development attraction? We have a lot of empty storefronts. We have a lot of buildings. How do we make that, through the guidelines, more attractive and work with businesses and not against them?
Yeah, they are, definitely based on best practices. They're going to help illustrate for businesses kind of the best way to do things. They typically also support, the guidelines typically go hand in hand with other programs as well, facade grant programs. Trying to think of some other economic storefront programs where like a downtown partnership makes sure that, there's flowers planted and everybody washes their windows. Those are the kinds of things that make a huge difference in a downtown. We can talk about them in the guidelines, but they're really, more part of another program that might go well and pair well with it. We can talk about those in the guidelines to help promote that. We can put within there, there are other things, we can look at other communities as we go through this process and see which ones we think are successful and what they're doing. I know a lot of communities are looking at entertainment districts whereby they, apply. I don't know if you have that here. You do? Okay. Is it, how long ago did that happen? Oh, wow. Okay, so you've had it a while. Okay. A lot of people, so those things go hand in hand in making sure that people are aware that that exists and that you're promoting that. Sometimes your merchants have an association. Do you have a Main Street program?
Yes,
or-
we have
Yes,
Main
you
Yes,
do.
and we
So
have a-
you're there. You're
And we have
there.
an active chamber too, so.
You're there. So it's just a matter of making sure that all of those resources can be easily found and are connected to each other.
Any other questions from the city council? Larry?
Larry Selenius, 123 North Walnut Street. Three quick comments. You've been talking mostly about the appearance, but for economic development, we also need speedy approvals of signs and changes. When a new merchant comes to town, they want to get in business right away. You, at some point, said the Design Review Commission should be able to regularly change the guidelines. I honestly think it must be approved by council. When people come to the Design Review Commission, for instance, with a new sign, they're expected to design one and bring pictures of what it will look like. Some even make the sign ahead of time. They should not be surprised with changes that they didn't know about. I think all the changes should be approved by city council. And then, in your proposed schedule, I may have missed something, but I think you should have in-person meetings with the Chamber of Commerce, Main Street Ravenna, and the public. Thank you.
We are taking
Yes, Cliff.
Cliff Sobel, I'm a member of the Design Review Commission. I want to make sure that you understand that Ravenna is its own place. It's much different than Hudson, Kent, Aurora, or anywhere else in the state. We had different things that made Ravenna happen. We've always been different here. We've been a lot more blue collar over the years. We've always seen that. One of the things that I want to make sure, though, that happens is that going forward, I'm one of the younger members on the commission. Okay? There's going to be a change of the guard here, not only just in the commission, but in general, the generations that will use this city in the future. And it's changing quickly, as you know, because you've done it more than I did, but I can see it. You're going to need to make sure that we are someplace that youth wants to come live, and also to be able to support the people that are in those businesses. And there will be a huge change in that now. You see it already. We're getting an influx of Kent people, Kent students that want to live here. Number one, because it's a little cheaper, and I don't want to mess with that too much by making these buildings too expensive and to raise the rent. You see, but there's going to be a change of the guard, and it's going to happen quickly, and I don't want to be handcuffed into something that will hold that up. So I appreciate a few little things. Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff. Any other comments from anyone or questions? Well, thank you so much for coming here tonight. We really appreciate it. It's been a long process. I was just looking at our deadline for reviewing our original RFQ, and you know, this goes back over a year, well over a year, that we've been kind of sorting this out. So we're really glad to have you on board. We're looking forward to you gaining input from our community, and then especially looking forward to the outcome, your proposals, and all the hard work that you do. So thank you. All right, moving on with the agenda. The next thing is more of our business as usual. We are preparing to apply for the Connecting Communities Planning Grant. And we had applied for this before. Bob, I think you're the one who prepared the grant material the first time around. Looks like it was, what, 2016?
16. We applied, we were unsuccessful.
Okay, and I'm not fully versed on this, but my understanding is it has to do with getting a grant to help facilitate the connection of, say, the hike and bike trail to downtown, that kind of thing, design, or it's going to pay for a consultant or somebody to come in and do a study to see the feasibility of that kind of process. Doesn't actually pay for doing the work.
Correct.
Just, okay, maybe you want to talk a little bit more
So
about it.
Connecting Communities Grant is basically just how it says. It's connecting communities. So the very first Connecting Communities grant Ravenna was awarded, and it was dubbed R2R, which was Ravenna to Rootstown. They studied the Chestnut Corridor from the hospital down to Neomed. And there was recommendations and that sort of thing of what could be done. With that, I believe the county engineer used that study, received the grant to put the sidewalk in from the underpass to city limits, which was where our city sidewalk is. A lot of the other stuff wasn't real feasible because power poles along Chestnut Street are too close to the road, the expense to relocate, so. Then in 16, I applied for, at the time, we had kind of discussed the old high school being a hub for colleges. Actually, I think that had already died on the vine, but I used that for the grant. Trying to tie the bike trail, Osborne Park, downtown, that sort of thing. There was 8 applicants that year, and At the time, we had a match, so I asked for $20,000 and we were gonna put $5,000 in. There was other communities that were asking for $40,000 and they were gonna pay a lot more, so we didn't score as high. Todd Peets asked Judy if she was interested, and I had sent him what we had done in the past. We actually met this morning, and I've already told Judy I'm out of ideas, so if Todd Peets has ideas, super. So after our meeting today, he said he would put something together. I don't know what he's gonna put together, but
There's still a 20% match, isn't there?
according to Judy, there's no match.
Oh, I thought I read there was. Maybe that was because it was the old
It
application.
might have been the old one. The old one had the match. And I texted her a little bit ago and asked her if there was a match because I'm not involved with it. I'm trying not to be involved with it. And she said there was no match. I
Okay.
didn't read the application because I wasn't going to apply for it. So Todd Peets has other ideas, which is wonderful, that he can move forward with it. But I do believe it's gonna somehow tie in Osborne Park, bike trail downtown. That's our intent.
Yeah, so, and again, this is just to do the study, and it
Yeah.
looks like there's 80,000 available, and they hope to fund two $40,000 projects. But I'm not seeing anything that says there's a match here.
Is a copy of the one that we have, it's just the 2016.
I'm not sure what you have.
Yeah, I think that's the old one.
Yep, yes, that's,
Yeah.
Pat Jefferson, I put that together a couple years ago, or 2016, correct?
Yeah, it's,
This is off topic just a
Yeah,
little bit.
that's
But
okay.
If you're talking about going from the bike trail up to Osborne Park and keeping it off of the roadway, how would we acquire properties, or how would we get it from the bike trail to Osborne?
So a few years ago, Duracoat and Kathy Hammonds worked out an agreement that the city would take ownership or an easement from Third Avenue to Highland Avenue. They would not grant us permission with the rest of their property because they have parking lot and that sort of thing. So our thought was we would come down Diamond Street to Third, get into that old rail corridor, come across Highland into Osborne that way.
Okay.
That was how I put the grant together, or the request, connecting communities request.
are you under the impression they'll have something for city council by the time we meet in February, or is this
Yeah.
something we just leave on the agenda?
The applications are due
Oh,
February 9th.
okay, well, that-
So, yeah, he's gonna have to have
I'll
something.
follow up with Judy and see where the process is.
So she's on vacation
oh, she
starting
is?
Thursday until the end of the month.
I'll try to send her something
She'll
tomorrow.
be in the office tomorrow if you can hit her up tomorrow.
Okay. All right, so then, are we okay, because it looks like if we take any action, it's going to be in February. We go, okay to pass this on? Okay.
I remember they talked about it back when Kathy was doing it.
Okay. Third item on the agenda is recreational marijuana. So, and Bob had sent out an email regarding this somewhat, and a link to, I guess it was a news broadcast. And I'm not sure I understand all the logistics here, but have you talked to Mr. Semino about, because I guess one of the questions is, do we have to put something in place in order for a dispensary to go into business in the city?
Well, as I had said before, currently, nowhere in our code does recreational legal
Right.
marijuana sales exist.
Right, but that doesn't, is there anything with comic book stores? You know, I mean, does
Yeah,
that?
there is.
Oh, there is? I gotta pick a different example. My point is, just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean it necessarily can't
Well,
operate.
According to Mr. Semino, it cannot operate.
Okay, well,
Or-
that's-
Or planning commission can decide to say no because of that.
Okay, all right,
And-
so we do need something.
Yes, and we've
Okay.
we've removed stuff from the code. So I can't remember, I think it had something to do with the games of skill, games of chance, gambling type of stuff.
Oh, yeah,
A few years ago, we took it out of central business district because that's not where we wanted it. And there was something that kind of alluded to that being permitted or
And
something.
is this something we would want in our downtown too?
I'm sorry?
Is this something that we would want in our downtown?
Correct.
I just want to say I commend the city of Streetsboro. They've been very aggressive lately and passing moratoriums like crazy and banning things that, I would myself question, would I want in our community? Because it promotes things that we don't need in our downtown. So, this is, something that I don't feel needs to be in our downtown. So, whatever my opinion and my feeling is, for our downtown, we have other issues, and I don't think that this is an appropriate thing when we just had someone talk about, revitalizing our downtown and making it look historic and nice, and then, end up with, one of these stores in our downtown. I don't think it's appropriate.
Well, and parlaying on that, how many of these types of stores is appropriate in a small community of Ravenna?
I think the way that Streetsboro did it was actually somewhat reasonable. Where they limited and they specified the type of building, facility, property that it needed to be located in. I certainly am not in favor of 100% banning it from the city. It's obviously what the majority of voters voted for.
Right.
But I do think having a limit and, some guidelines to it
Oh,
is appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my concern was whether or not, and I think the likelihood is that our medical marijuana dispensary will be, if they haven't already, are investigating becoming a recreational, and the state calls it adult use cannabis dispensary. And if they could just go do it without our input, it sounds like they can. So that's good news. So then the question is, what do we want? And I forget, I was looking through the code, I can't remember, we do restrict the medical marijuana dispensaries and where they can go into business. We may, so logistically though, at this point, I'm not proposing we move anything on for action, but I wanted to get a sense from council what direction we should go. My first inclination was, well, let's just create a footnote somewhere that says, adult cannabis dispensaries will act or whatever according to the rules for medical marijuana dispensaries. But it sounds like we want to maybe even put more restrictions on, the recreational dispensaries. But so it sounds to me like what we want to do maybe is just copy what we did for medical marijuana and then put in that code, like medical marijuana is 862 in our code of ordinances. We can make a new chapter, 863, take what's in medical marijuana and then just modify it as we see fit for recreational marijuana. That would going to be my plan.
Well, I think whatever we decide to do, we need to move sooner than later, because these are gonna start showing up and we're gonna be behind. Things
Well-
take a process here, and once somebody comes and presents something to Bob, it's too late
Well,
before we can stop
but
them.
wait, I think we just confirmed that can't happen until we
Right
create
now,
code.
can't do it.
So that we don't, that's, because that was my initial
All right, I
concern.
was-
So we don't have to worry about that. We're in front of the game here. Somebody can't sneak in and become an adult cannabis dispensary without us first creating the rules. Okay? I mean, that's what I'm going by. That's why I'm saying I don't know that we need to do anything right away. But my approach would be to, I already copied the medical marijuana dispensary chapter, and I was going to just massage through it for adult use cannabis dispensaries. And then we could bring this back next month, however long it takes, to decide where we want to put them, what other restrictions we want on them. Unfortunately, we can't tax them, so we're not going to make any money off of this.
They already,
Similar to alcohol.
they already have, in the issue 2, they already state how the municipalities
Right.
will receive revenue.
Right, there's a carve-out for
Correct.
that through the state.
But you're right.
But I'm just saying, we can't put our own fees in there.
So the video that I sent, my interpretation is the Senate wanted to change some things that the voters
Yes.
approved, and the House said, no, the voters approved, we're gonna stick to what the voters said. And they decided they weren't gonna come back into session until February.
Yeah, I mean, you can never figure out what's going to happen down in Columbus. Somebody could propose any kind of changes, but I think you're right. I think those who wanted to make changes to it were rebuffed by some people who said, wait, the public spoke and we're not going to, because they wanted to reduce the THC level, how many plants you could grow, and so they wanted to be more restrictive.
So we have a couple months.
But there may be some tweaking. Don't be surprised if there is some tweaking of the law that was passed, because it's not in the Constitution, as opposed to the abortion issue that was on the ballot.
Do we currently restrict medical marijuana facilities to an area outside of downtown?
I think
Based on
so.
commercial, industrial,
I was trying to look
conditional
through
use?
the code, and
Yes.
for
Be
some reason not
located
being.
in C1,
Okay.
C2, and I1 districts.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
this
not
is,
in the-
this is a tough issue, though, because on the one hand, kind of as Cheryl was saying, the law was passed that makes it permissible to sell it. Talk about
Well-
bringing people to downtown, it, might bring people to downtown a lot if we have a location. I do want to limit the number of locations and
Yeah, exactly.
maybe where they are, but it's really a question for us to think about.
It is, but I will note that the law passed did allow for municipalities to ban in their cities.
Okay?
So it could have done the opposite, because there are some state laws we can't, overrule. But I agree. I think the will of the people is that they want this. I agree it shouldn't be downtown. And I think we already have a facility that's in an appropriate place. So if they want, but yeah, we want to limit the numbers and where they can be and maybe some other things. We'll have to look at it. But again, we probably don't need to get into a huge debate about that tonight. If it's okay with everyone, I'll look through the code, make some changes, and we'll have some presentations and opportunities to revise it. There's no pressing need at the moment, unless we get pressure from the existing medical marijuana dispensary to move quickly, which, well,
When the state finally resolves their issues.
yeah, it's going to be a little while too.
Probably, I will receive a phone call from Supergood,
Right.
which I've already received an email from them.
Oh,
Because
okay.
they will be the first in line to be able to sell legally.
Right.
They've already been told that.
And again, like,
Well, they're set up, right?
I think everybody here has been pretty supportive on, with
Yeah.
Good Sun or Super Good, sorry. Super Good, and, I do support medical marijuana, but again, we're taking it to a different level, and I think that we just need to control in our downtown. And, we're not saying we're against it, but I think, in moderation, to start with, and that might be something that we could review in a few years to see how it goes, the size of this town, and some of the areas that it's going into. So that's just my thought.
Okay.
I would like to understand how the business would operate. When medical marijuana was being introduced, they came in and talked to us, these are our rules that we have to follow by the state. The state has cameras, they can do this, they can do that. The windows have to be darkness, they only allow people in, it has I'd like to know how the recreation works also.
Right.
And there's nobody to tell us that yet.
I don't know if they put in those kinds of those kind of restrictions in the law they passed.
Yeah, but I believe it's things that need to be asked, because you don't want it sold, as an example, I'm just hypothetically saying, a hobby store. If, some people do things like this as a front, and certain things have to have
Well, it's still
specific questions.
It's still state regulated. I mean, it's not, so you can't just like sell it out of your basement or
I
sell
don't
it out
know,
of
I'm
the back
not-
of your store like that. I mean,
Right.
it's still regulated.
It's going to be
Right.
regulated by the
It's going to be
policies.
regulated by.
Right, but
so-
I don't know that it has the kind of regulations Bob was talking about.
But I mean,
Yes.
it's just like buying cigarettes or beer. I mean, there's regulations and things that we all have to follow.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
certainly, I mean,
But it's new too.
absolutely, so
It
we have
is,
to
but
work
they're
through a lot.
still working, and that's why they set up a whole commission to oversee it, is to set those policies. I don't think that we should jump the gun and start making restrictions until we see what restrictions the state puts on it, and it might very well conform to what we would like to see in our city. But I'm not willing to just ban it or to go against what the voters have wanted.
Yeah, I think we all,
We've
seems
all
like
said that.
most people agree that is the case. There's just some basic regulations and where it can be and that kind of thing. How many, those, where, I don't know if it's even in the law that passed, whether it can be near schools and stuff like that,
I don't
so.
think drive-throughs can be near, so close to schools either, alcohol sales. That is also not allowed. So
Yeah.
it's in the same.
But we
way-
put it in our code for medical marijuana, so we would want to do that. Okay, again, no action item here. So the last item on the agenda was just the ongoing discussion of our safety and City Hall buildings. I didn't have anything, and nobody's presented any new updates for me, but, okay, Bob has an update.
I have a
then.
couple,
Okay,
another item to
good.
add also.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it's a simple thing. With regard to safety buildings, we asked the architect to provide a similar contract to what we were using for the safety building, police and fire and city hall. So Sean came back with a fee of $7,400 to, in essence, develop the same concept of what he's done for police, fire, city hall for Judy.
Oh, okay.
For a recreational
Parks and
building.
Rec.
So he'll meet with her and what do you want, and kind of start sketching out some things, different rooms, trying to put a price tag to it, because that's what we lack right now is a price tag
For the building?
for the
Or-
building. We need a footprint
What about the?
and a price tag.
So council had to approve the architect's proposal for we already saw those. Do we need a new contract? Okay, is that in the pipeline, or?
I have it here, yes.
Oh.
I had asked Judy it didn't get moved forward to you, so
Can it be
we're
moved
discussing.
forward before the committee of the whole?
I can give it to you, I can send it to you now.
Okay, so
Yeah, I
let's,
can
all
send you
right.
that contract now.
All right, so basically what we're talking about is, we've already seen some renderings with the city hall and the safety departments included in the plan, and then we're just adding on, and it seemed that council was a little bit surprised that they weren't included in that original contract, and so now we're just going to go back to the well and add them. Are we good to,
So is that going to be included in the same piece of land as the other things? Are we
Well,
looking at
yeah, it's-
other options as well?
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
Because I know there's been a discussion of fitting them on the same piece of property, but with parks, they have so many other options.
Yeah, we do have
And-
other options.
And I think the first thing we need to do is discover what the price tag of what Judy is looking for is. Is it 5,000, is it 8,000, is it 10,000? And then,
million?
yeah, I'm sorry, million.
Otherwise, we'll approve it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we get one for 3,000.
Where do I sign up? Based on square footage, it's at least 5.8, based
Okay.
on almost a 200 by 200 by 150 foot is what she sketched out.
And and this is my opinion may be a little different than the rest of council. If we're going to do it right.
Yeah,
Do we have to have everybody on one campus? Is there a better option?
Can we fit
Is there
everybody?
is there an option at one of the parks that makes more sense to have the offices there? Is there an office for a vacant lot somewhere that would make more sense than shoving everyone onto one?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
With parks, there's land, there's Chestnut Hills, there's Osborne, there's
The new park?
City Park.
Yeah.
You know, there's 3 options, or, yeah, they could be down on Emerald Lake. I mean, there's just so many other options.
What does the park board say when you guys have had conversations?
Oh,
Have
they of course want a brand new building.
I mean, have they gave input on what they, where they felt it should be?
No, but it was a brief discussion when I met with them a couple months ago to talk about Osborne Park. I was assaulted with that question.
Oh.
And then once I started throwing more questions at them, they sort of backed down because they realized there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And location is, you know, again, Chestnut Hills would be a wonderful spot with all that acreage, but again, if the decision is to get them downtown, again,
And
these are
Chestnut Hills
decisions.
is so scenic-like as well. It's like, I hate to see that all congested, especially with a nursing home right next door and the park-like atmosphere.
But there's probably 8-10 acres of land, and the building's gonna have maybe 2 acres, you know what I mean? And so there's still, and there's infrastructure out there too, meaning water line, parking lot, there's things out in place already out there. We can say the same thing with Osborne. It's-
And for the capacity for the Parks District to utilize that space, to have programming there, and boom, there's the soccer field. But, you know, or to be able to have that space right there instead of having, you know, because there's the area to have it, is what I'm saying.
Oh.
So you have your offices there, you walk right out, you can run programming right in the park, it's right there. So that's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah.
The fact that there's other options for
Yeah.
location. Not to say that the old high school property's not a great fit, but again, the first is price tag, and then we gotta figure out, is it affordable? Or is it, how is it afforded? And then location and that sort
So
of
the
thing.
original safety, the phase one, I guess, we call it, for our safety building, is that, so what you presented to us, is that the, I mean, final draft?
No.
Or is that just something that was drafted up, that the architect gave you a visual image of, and this is what we're kind
So-
of looking at?
We worked with Mark and Jeff, Tim and I, met with the architect multiple times of what's needed. You know, Tim and I were mainly involved with City Hall, and then obviously the chiefs were involved with their buildings. So it was more of a square footage and a functionality, knowing when we hired the full design team, architect, contractor, that things were gonna change. You know, we didn't think too much of HVAC or that sort of thing. We were more, you know, with fire department, we were more sleeping rooms, and at least from my point, in 10 years, our society, how's it gonna change? So we thought, give everybody their own bathroom, sleeping rooms. We don't have to deal with any oddities in society. I call them oddities, I don't know.
It's
Probably not
okay.
appropriate, but you know what I'm saying.
We get the
You know, and also the growth. If the fire department needs another bay, that's why we were deciding that sort of thing. Police chief is interested in possibly a range in the basement, so we were kind of sorting that out. And then vehicles behind a fence, so there's just so many other things. But the functionality, a vehicle drives into Sallyport, they bring people out, they bring people out of the car, they shut the doors, bring people into the police department, and they go through their process of alignment, however they do, whatever they do there. So anyway, again, the original intent was to get a square footage. Do we need 20,000 square feet? Do we need 10,000? And the only way to do that is to kind of create sort of a footprint of the buildings. And go through, you know, we asked the guys to go through it. How do you function, and how from this point to this point, that sort of thing. But
So
we,
it's a draft.
in essence, it's a draft. Again, we're trying to figure out the financing part. And then also, you know, will it actually fit on that site? We believe it'll fit on that site. Same thing with City Hall. We could design City Hall 100 other ways, but we tried to eliminate the elevator, which is such a pain in the butt, but we really can't with City Hall because of the two-story and then the footprint. We don't have acres to spread it out, so that's why it figured shape-wise that it was. You know, and it had the components with Chelsea throwing her 2 cents in with council chambers and a room and how close she is proximity to all these things, and then the bathroom. But it wasn't ready to go to bid as it stood. It was gonna have changes, but we also wanted an object to show the residents, this is what, you know, this is what it's, you know, to look like. Obviously not 100%, because the renderings you saw were actually skewed a little bit, like Sallyport wasn't where it was supposed to be, but they did it that way to show these things existed. If not, you'd never see that behind the building.
All right, so we do want to make sure so as far as the agenda item, it's the contract to have Parks and Recs included
Yes.
somehow, whether it's on site with the other buildings or perhaps in a different location. We good to pass this on?
Yes.
Amy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, you had something else you wanted to add, Bob?
Yeah, so right now Parks Board is actually meeting, and I turned over the SOQs for Osborne Park to the Park Board. I met with them, Dr. Calfee was there for that meeting in November, I believe it was. And I created a scoring sheet for them, which I felt is the best way to choose. There was 4 architects, all 4 of them are certainly capable of doing it. So they're supposed to, at the end of their meeting tonight, have a decision on which one they want to hire.
Okay.
I would like to keep moving this forward. So I would like, so tomorrow she should tell me, Judy should tell me who it is, and then we can put the proposal together, send it to council.
Yeah.
So we had committed $10,000, so we would need to appropriate the $10,000 and then authorize the mayor to enter a contract with
With
the design
whoever
firm.
is chosen.
Is this for
Osborne Park.
Osborne? I talked to Mike Bogo today and asked him where were they at in terms of eliminating that railroad crossing? And he said it's gone. We can't get him to talk to us. If they're not talking to him, they're not gonna talk to you either.
So when Jim DePaula and I spoke,
Since the heat is off of them,
oh,
down in New Palestine, they're forgetting everything they promised.
so he had told, the man, I can't remember his name,
Sounds like it needs to be public.
he had mentioned to us that they got funding for it. So I'll reach out to him again.
Please check
Yeah.
on that before we spend.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good passing that along.
Yes.
All right, is there a management update, Mayor?
I just gave it to you.
No, thank you. Good. Thinking ahead. All right, then at 7:21, I will adjourn the planning committee meeting.
It's 7:31. I will start the Public Health and Safety Committee meeting. Hopefully mine shouldn't be too long to get us back on track. First item on the agenda was a $250 donation from the Elks Lodge to the Ravenna Police Department. They do this every year, and there is no match. This was just a donation, which is very kind of them, and we appreciate it. So thank you to the Elks Lodge for the donation. I don't know, Jeff, do you have anything special you were going to earmark this to, or?
No, not
No,
yet.
Not yet, okay. And there is no match. Next item is another item that does come to us every year, actually, and it's from Swagelaw. It's a $1,000 donation to police and fire. It is, there's no match. It's a very generous donation, and we are thankful we get this every year from them. So, again, I don't see a reason on us not taking the money and running. Is it okay, Roger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next item. Now, these next 2 items, I was a little confused, Bob, because they were on my agenda. So, you guys put the tracking to public health and safety, and when I looked at it, and it was about sewers, so I was just gonna turn it over to you to go ahead and explain.
I don't know what this is. I didn't do it, did I?
Dominic?
Dominic,
Dominic did, but Chelsea said that she got it, I got from you when I emailed you.
All right, I'll look at the tracking sheet here real quick.
Because I was questioning why it was on my committee.
I think it's just changes to the revised code.
Yeah,
that
I don't know if it's
we need to
because,
conform to.
yeah, it looks like just some changes. And I mean, it's fine, we can make the changes. Because-
It's health because it's sewer.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, it's sewer related, so it could go on any of the mixes. Yeah. So has out, the cross out of, in section D, his or her, and switched it to the owners. And then down below, they have marked off within 100 feet of the property line and added within 200 feet of the foundation wall of the structure from which sewage or other waste originate and public sewer is available and accessible and determined by the City of Ravenna and the Portage Health District. So,
Yeah, the 200 feet is EPA guidelines. Ours was obviously 100, and I had a battle with Portage County Health Department. Sometime in the summer, there was a house on Lover's Lane that they wanted to tie in because they were part of this 208 plan, which it's never really been an issue for us, but the way they carved it out years ago, this specific house, they wanted to connect. Well, they had crossed State Route 14. It wasn't economically feasible. It was 157 feet, which is more than our 100 feet. Well, then, anyway, that's where this is coming from.
okay. So, I'm okay with making the changes to, the ordinance. Are you okay?
Absolutely.
Are you okay? Okay. So we'll go ahead and move that forward with those changes. And looks like on the next page, under 1052.08 and 1052.09, number 2, down at the bottom, he has all of that crossed off.
Yeah.
And so it's removing that, and it says this is no longer permitted as 1 acre of disturbed area in the new standard. So it looks like we were removing this from the ordinance.
This is what we've practiced for years as it is. You disturb more than an acre, you have to control on-site drainage.
Okay.
So this.
And then the other,
Well,
next,
but this is removing 2 under E scope. Now you have to change 3 to 2.
well, yeah.
It's not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you just,
The-
we're gonna have to renumber.
Right, but that hasn't been done.
Well,
Maybe, I can't,
we'll make a note, Chelsea, to renumber that.
I'm trying to figure out, is there a 4? What?
No, there's an A and then there's a D. And.
Yeah,
then it-
there's a
Well,
4,
it's-
there's a 4 all the way through 13. You've got several pages that are not in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I'm saying, I think this is gonna take a lot
Well-
of changes.
So you can leave a 2 and just put omitted, and leave it blank.
It
leave the
doesn't have to
number.
be technical, yeah, I mean, you can,
Well, I think Walter Drain does the stuff anyway, so we just give them the changes and they redo it, right?
Are they?
I think, right? Isn't that how it works? Sort of?
Well, if it was formatted correctly, it would change automatically. but- Okay, I'm just pointing out that we, you know, if we're missing a 2 somewhere,
and,
The long list.
could look weird.
14, he has that taken out as well because it's no longer permitted. Down below 14, in the paragraph section, it's omitted 5 to 2 acres, 2 or more acres. So as you see below that, there's some changes. I'm not sure, he has it highlighted here, chapter 1052.08. But there's nothing after that, so I don't know if that, what he's wanting with that, if it's just showing where it starts, and then on the next page, under B, again, he's showing where it's Xed out what he wants out, and he has added what he needs in. So, this, what can be added in could be under B and, you know, this taken out, is that right, Chelsea?
It looks like it. He's got extra space.
So we're just we're moving this and adding the changes that he has written out. Looks like he did a lot of his homework.
There's more.
Yeah, and then we go to the next page, under A. So, I mean, you can go through here in the committee and see everything he's removed. I'm not gonna question what he removed, because obviously that's
These are
his job.
these are standards that we
It's
have
all
to.
EPA.
Yeah, so I'm okaying it, and I'm going to, trust our council clerk. She knows what she's doing in readjusting and renumbering on what needs to happen.
I'll talk to Dominic,
Yeah,
because I need a final product
yeah, absolutely.
to me.
Thank you. Okay, so with all the changes that were presented to us, I don't have a problem because they have to be done. So, and I'm not gonna, critique what he's done because that's not my expertise. And as we pointed out, it's EPA mandated, so. I don't have a problem with moving this forward to make the changes. Matt, do you have issues? Rob?
Move it forward.
You okay? Okay, we'll move it forward. Last item I wanted to bring up was, I don't know if you everyone received, Jeff has some good news. Our police department, we need an ordinance accepting, an amount that we received, a grant for. We received $10,425 for the body, camera. So that grant was received.
Awesome.
There's no match on this, Jeff, right?
No.
Yeah, this is just straight money from the government that we were awarded along with several other communities. So this is a great asset to our police department. So I'm glad that this came through and we got it. So just accepting the money in the grant.
I think
Okay?
I'm just going to comment, that's a bigger asset than what it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
It's crazy.
Any other updates, management updates?
that was I believe I thought when I was reading that was for the purchase of cameras.
We've got a grant
Yes.
for it. Yeah, to get the
The
grant.
10,000.
Yeah, we received that
And they
money.
gave it to almost everybody in the state
Mhm.
with that. And on Dominic's presentation, what I got out of that when I read it is that they were trying to draw us into compliance with the state and the federal government as to how we, the distances that was affected by that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. With that being said, it's 7:32. I will adjourn public health and safety.
7:32, I'll call Streets and Sidewalks Committee meeting to order. 4 items for consideration this evening. First item is to advertise, allow the mayor to advertise for bids for the 24 annual paving program. There's a couple maps that Mr. Finney included in with this. It shows past pavings and then what's projected for the 24 paving program. The big one there is 59 from city line to city line.
We do have a pre-construction meeting scheduled with ODOT at the beginning of March to start this project.
And the estimated cost for the 24 program.
Just had that opened up.
$1,139,547.
Perfect. That includes the third phase of South Freedom Street also, which is the largest, most expensive section.
Street never gets paved.
We'll be glad to have that finished.
Matt, we have a,
Utilize those funds somewhere else.
Yeah.
we have a comment or a question?
Yes, Cliff.
Hi, just quickly, because I don't want to bother Bob Noyes, but busy during the meeting, got him here. I saw the map you sent me, and I appreciate that. I also noticed that there's not a whole lot of streets that we are doing overlay on. Most of them are crack seal.
Sure.
And of course, Freedom Street and Main are part of Main Street. That's going to be, how much is it to, just curious, doing crack crack seal. There's a lot of it being done, and so is that quite expensive?
I'll tell you what has been budgeted. Maybe. If I can find it here. Trying to think where the best place for me to get it. Bear with me here. Most. So striping, he has $90,000 for striping. And we've got $174,000 for concrete repairs. Asphalt resurfacing, $421,000. Freedom Street, South Freedom Street is $375,000. And crack sealing, he just has it added in, so generally, it's probably $50,000 for crack sealing.
Okay, I didn't know where there's, I know it come to a million something, but I didn't see where it was coming from. And obviously, the 300,000 or 400,000 for overlay for repairing the streets. There's a chunk of that coming to Main Street, right?
No, but we budgeted Main Street from extra fund, different funds.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure where.
We already paid for the, I think, our
Yes.
local share this year, or in '23, I mean.
Correct, we
Yeah.
paid for the.
We paid it because their starts, their year starts in July of
Yeah,
'23.
and they require the money up front.
Correct, okay, okay.
That was 650,000-ish
Okay.
for that,
Well, that
for our
saved us
portion of Main Street.
from
Well,
taking away from our regular paving.
$2
and
million
that was great.
project.
That was great, okay,
Yeah.
that's it, thanks.
I have a question pertaining to that, the crack and seal. Is that done by the street department?
No, we hire a consultant to do that. Or not a consultant, but a contractor.
Okay.
We don't have the equipment to crack seal.
Yeah, because I remember we used to.
They sold all that a long time ago.
I was hoping it would have been replaced, but
Any other questions? 24 paving project. Okay, to move that forward? Committee, okay. Next item on the agenda is allow the advertisement for the 24 pavement marking and striping. This is an annual item that we do every year. And Mr. Finney just mentioned that the estimated cost this year will be $90,000, just over $90,000.
One of the things we're starting to do is change the crosswalk to the ladder look, or we call it a ladder look, rather than just
Instead
two
of just the two
dark
lines.
lines. And it shows up something that ODOT has gone to and endorses.
I like it, but I've noticed on Chestnut,
Yeah, they need to
It's
restripe
not-
those. They used
it's
cold
not
weather
with-
paint and it hasn't held up well.
yeah, it hasn't held up.
Yeah, so we'll get them to come back and freshen it up.
Any questions about that? We'll go ahead and move that item forward as well. Next item on the agenda is a contract with GDP Group. I'll let Mr. Finney explain this one.
To continue the conversation regarding King and Main, I sent an email out sort of explaining also, we have to do something at that intersection because we're gonna widen it. And I've spoke to Pathmaster, which is our equipment company. They're the engineers that I've worked with for over 10 years now, and they sell, but they also can design equipment. And we can control King and Main from the Diamond Street controller, which is about $20,000, so trying to reduce costs. We have some old traffic signal poles in stock that we've taken down from other intersections. Again, that saves money. But even with the money that I believe we can save, we're still probably $80,000 to re-equip that intersection to a full functioning signal. So we either remove the signal, which we're gonna need a warrant analysis to do that, or we rebuild the signal, and then we're gonna need $80,000 to do that. Or we accept alternates that would still have a signalized crosswalk, but not a fully functioning traffic signal.
Have you had that, the $80,000 that you're saying, do you have the quotes that you know for sure that is the price? Or are you just guessing?
I'm using the numbers that we saw, I'm using the average numbers that we saw for Cleveland, Highland, and Sycamore intersection.
What about the light that is down on Riddle and that's not really used at all?
If city council would like to remove all of that and replace it, then obviously we would save the equipment, and we probably would still be $30,000 for removal, because we have to still set new bases, concrete bases for the pedestrian poles, and then also the underground wiring and stuff. So,
So what's
I'm
on-
just throwing that number out, if that were the case.
So what's in front of us, though, is to have the survey completed and have the company that's gonna do the survey also design something for that intersection.
So phase one, the $6,000 fee, whatever it is, that's gonna do a signal analysis, and then if it's not a signal warrant analysis, if it's not warranted, which I already know it's not, because it's already been done, but we have to update it, because ODOT does change their standards. Once we're told that it's not a warranted signal, then GPD will give us options. If you don't like those options, then we'll turn it into a full signal design and have to potentially hire GPD, or I'll solicit bids to design that full signal.
So the intent at that intersection is not to eliminate everything, it's to make it more practical. Possibly being more practical might be a design of a pedestrian-only crossing that will only change on signal when there's a pedestrian trying to cross Main Street. We're not trying to eliminate that with the school there, we know we need to keep things safe. So that's the goal, and we're trying to do it the best way possible, and the least expensive as possible. So right now, before us is the survey, because we need to have it unwarranted, because it's been so long since the survey's been done on that corner, before we can do anything. So we've gotta pay for the survey. Something's gotta be done, because we're widening Main Street in that area, and what we have there is not practical. It's failing, we need to upgrade it. So there will be something there, and we get to decide what's there. But what's in front of us now is for the survey and a couple design options for that intersection.
The 12,000, you said it's 6,000? That's the only figure I heard.
Correct.
So what's the other 6,000?
If it needs to go into a full design, that would be their design fee.
What's going to prevent it from needing a design?
Well, so first of all, if it's not warranted,
If it
then
is, so if it is warranted, we don't need to spend the six?
well, we'll still have to have a design. If
And
it's
if-
warranted and we're gonna put the signal back, we'll need a design. Or if it's if it's
not
warranted and city council wants to remove Riddle intersection, we're still gonna need a design to make sure it fits, because there's a phasing plan that gets designed, there's underground electric.
And if it's not warranted, we need a design?
We will need some option, yeah. What will that option be?
Okay, so it's 6,000 for the study, 6,000 for the design, whatever that means. Okay.
So it's gonna be a multi-phase
Correct.
project. This is
Bunch
the
of
first
if state,
phase.
if then else.
I'm just confused, I have a question. So
Sure.
the same group that is doing the study is also doing the design.
Potentially.
Is
We
that
would-
not a conflict?
No,
I mean, how
because
can
we would have to
you
come
do a
back.
Study and say it's not gonna work, and yet then I'm gonna turn around and I'm gonna design this for you. I mean,
What's going to say it's not going to work, and then here's some recommendations of things that can work in your community. So they're going to look at the traffic patterns, they're going to look at pedestrians, they're going to look at all of that, and they're going to say, here's the recommendations that we think would work well for you.
but then you just said though, they would design it. I'm just.
That's,
curious.
well, design recommendation, that's the word,
Okay,
yeah.
I just asking this
So
question.
this phase is just appropriating the study. Then the second phase, if city council, whatever you choose, then we can solicit other bids from other design firms or use them. I was using a different company to do other signals. When I asked for prices to do this one, he was $1,500, $1,700 more, something like that, than what GPD quoted.
So the 12,000 is for the survey, not necessarily the design then?
The survey's
12,000 would be
6,000.
for a full design.
6,000 for the survey.
Correct, 6,000 for the survey.
Regardless of, but depending upon the outcome of the survey, there's going to be a design depending upon what we want to do with that intersection.
Correct, correct.
So it's just appropriating the design costs up front.
We don't have to appropriate design costs. We could just appropriate the warrant analysis
True.
and then the recommendation.
We're going to have to
component.
come back, you're going to have to come back to council and get a decision after that anyway. So you could reduce it to 6,000.
Right, right. That's, would be my recommendation, is just to get something moving, and obviously we'll figure it out from there.
Cheryl, Paul, I mean, my recommendation at this time is to have the survey done and, the design done all at one time. This project's gotta get moving. We need to get that widened and get all this stuff in place before summer. So, me personally, I'm okay with the way it is. If you guys choose to
I'm okay with
do it
moving it.
separately,
No, it needs to be done considering this, that's part of the street being widened right there. So it's good just to go ahead and get things done now, and we'll find out which direction to have it done properly.
we'll go ahead and move that forward as is. And the last item on the agenda is snow plow and salt equipment for the new 500 truck that we purchased at the end of last year for our street department. It came to us pretty much a blank slate. We knew there was going to be additional cost to have it outfitted. The additional cost is $38,496.67. Most of that will be coming out of the capital fund, and then there will be a small percentage water, sewer, storm as well. But the way things are looking, we need to get that outfitted sooner
Right.
than later.
So what percentage, how will that be split?
I'm not sure exactly, Brian, do you know offhand?
Not offhand, but it'll be split the same way the original truck was split. So we had met with them in the past, and they gave us an estimate. Love Jason, and it even dates back to the previous superintendent. What was his name?
Chuck?
Chuck, yeah. Discussions with him and then later with Jason about how much should be allocated to water, sewer, and storm. So it'll be divided up exactly the same as the original truck. So I can't remember if it was like 10% on each one of those funds, and I think it was 10% on each one of those funds and 70% in the regular capital fund.
Okay, so
Something
capital would be approximately 80%.
70.
I think 70 is what I remember, but I have to look that up exactly, but yeah, it'll be the majority of it.
Any other questions? Everybody okay with
Move
moving
it
that forward?
forward.
We'll go ahead and move that forward as well. We have a management update at this time.
Not tonight.
Okay. 7:48, I will adjourn the Streets and Sidewalks Committee meeting.
Okay, 7:48, I'll start the Utility Committee meeting. First thing on the agenda will be purchasing a handful of new water meters. These would be 3, 4, and 6-inch meters. Quite often, meters are purchased when they completely stop. But when you're looking at industrial meters, it's better to replace those beforehand, because after a certain time, which is unpredictable, they will start to slow down. And it's better to get these purchased and get these changed before that starts to happen. And it'll be by a company called Ferguson Waterworks. They are adaptable for what's in there now. The software is adaptable. And that's the only company that's going to work with these.
Hey, Paul, the only question I have
Yeah.
is that it says 11 so that we can get the bulk discount and that it's going to exceed the $25,000 threshold, but nowhere do I see the estimated or the amount that needs appropriated.
You've got to, yes, that's, yeah, I don't want to guess. And the reason it's the 10% bulk, where, let's say you just get 2 or 3 of those, and then you wouldn't get the discount compared to getting all of those at once. But to answer the other part of your question, the exact cost, the only way I can answer that would be I could contact Mike Reynolds tomorrow and get that exact cost.
You know, I did have some discussions with Mike on this. I mean, he was, right
Okay.
now, when council appropriated the budget back in July for '24, they had $36,000 in here. He was saying they're gonna need about a total of about 100,000 in there for the entire year, because there was not contemplating at the time in July when, going over the budget, that they were gonna purchase all these different meters. These are for this is kind of a continuation of where they went to all the residents and,
This is
replaced all the meters.
commercial.
He contemplated replacing all the business ones at the time too, but he wanted to eke a little more life out of them because they were not at the end of their useful life yet. But now they really are, and even though they're not failing yet, like Paul said, they want to go ahead and replace these before they fail, because then it's more of an inconvenience to the businesses, and like Paul said, they can slow down, there's all sorts of problems. So being at the end of the life, he just wants to be in the forefront of these and get these replaced.
So when you say 100,000 for the year, you're saying
Yeah.
the budget is 100,000 for the
The
year?
budget right now is 36,000, and
And
the
they
current
wanna
budget, he's gonna add another 64 is the note that I have. So that's,
Thank you.
we can either, yeah, so we can either add it to this ordinance, or I can do it when we do the cleanup ordinance when I present in March, whichever, council prefers on that. So.
I'm okay either way.
And the nice thing about getting these done early is some of these companies that run nonstop,
Yeah.
at least they can be installed in a time when they shut down, which I know it's rare, but
Yeah, they could schedule them, you're right, exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sounds good.
All right, move it forward.
and Cheryl, did you want another exact number?
No,
Okay.
Brian's responses.
Okay. And this next one, cost of living adjustments for water and sewer rates. Okay, sometimes this term is lumped together, but water and sewer would be wastewater, 3.4%, and water treatment. So those rates differ from one department to the other. For the most part, it costs more to treat sewer water than it does in water treatment before it is potable. So the 3.4 would be with the cost of living, and let's say an example, 1 year, it's in a negative amount, well then it won't be subtracted, so it would just stay the same, if that would ever happen again. And then this would,
Last year, I think was 8.3 or 8.4%
you're correct.
Somewhere close to that.
total. So it went down.
So We got you sent a message out today, and did your message say we don't need to make changes?
To the original tracking sheet to.
Oh, I thought you meant we didn't have to make changes to the code.
No, there's no changes being made. I had a long discussion with Frank Semino.
Okay,
Uh,
so
he
what
made-
action, if any, do we need to do?
Basically, it's just an ordinance saying that we can institute those 3.4% raises on both water and sewer, based on the COLA, the CPI adjustment.
But isn't is that not already in the ordinance?
Well, the ordinance states that I have to bring it to
Oh.
you guys
So
to
we have
give
to
him
say-
authorization to
Oh,
do that.
okay.
It's supposed to be brought here every year.
Yeah, I
So,
don't
I mean,
remember.
it doesn't, I mean, it'll change every year, but I mean, if it's a negative, I mean, really, I mean, the negatives don't go down. I mean, it only if it's positive. I mean, it's just how it's always worked. So,
Cost of
just-
living seems to always go
you
up.
know, his recommendation was, hey, you know, can we approve
Okay.
the rate raises?
Okay.
I have an item I'd like to add.
Yes?
Authorizing the mayor to advertise for the Seabury Sanitary Sewer Project, which is 100% funded through a grant. Council accepted this grant last year sometime, and we're finally getting it out to bid. We need an ordinance out to advertise. I'll put a tracking sheet together tomorrow.
Are there any other comments for Mr. Finney had just mentioned?
No.
Okay.
That's been in the works a long time.
I do remember that quite
Yeah.
some time ago.
Yeah.
Okay, at this time that I will ask for a management update.
I have nothing.
Okay. And then at 7:55, the utility committee will be closed.